In 1995, a murder took place that rocked the heart of Friday Night Lights, Texas.
This is where the actual shooting occurred that finished the life of Adrian Jones.
The shocking murder of a popular high school athlete caught in the middle of a tangle of young love and obsession.
The intensity and the emotion was white hot.
Made for one of the most famous tabloid obsessive cases ever to come out of Texas.
This was the most unforgivable crime I've ever investigated.
She was really athletic. She was really nice.
We lost a member of our family. It's our school family.
It just breaks my heart.
This mysterious murder forever impacted all the people involved, from the investigators to the prosecutors who had to handle the case, and one of those was a friend of mine from back at the DA's office, Michelle Hartman.
To return a verdict of guilty to capital murder.
And even to the high-powered defense lawyers.
Might this make it just a little easier to overcome another person who was healthy?
Regardless of who you believe was responsible, it wrecked the lives of 3 different families.
On a cold wintry morning, December the 4th, 1995, a man named Gary Foster discovered something horrible off of Seton Road and Joe Pool Lake.
It wasn't a direct route anywhere. It was a very little used side road from nowhere to nowhere.
Early that morning, he went down to his mailbox, and he had some property next to his house, an open field, surrounded by a barbed wire fence. He looked over into his field, and he saw someone laying on the ground, feet tangled up in the barbed wire. He went over and saw that it was a young lady that was deceased. And he called the police.
Grand Prairie detectives Dennis Clay and Dennis Meyer arrived to the scene that morning and find what they believed to be a teenage girl lying face up in the dirt. She's got 2 bullet wounds, one to her cheek and one to her forehead. And she has a wound to the back of her head that might have been caused by a blow from a blunt object.
A crime scene can speak to you in many ways if you but listen. At the scene, crime scene recovers 2 shell casings, and because the bullets were found underneath her, that would tell us somebody stood over her and fired these shots into her face. So no, suicide was never a thought. She had some scrapes of barbed wire on her legs, and she had on shorts and just socks, like she was dressed to go to bed.
The victim was not wearing what you would expect her to be wearing on a cold wintry night. Does that mean that she was possibly abducted from her home, or was she already with her murderer, meaning she could have possibly been with somebody she knew?
The victim's right hand had clutched the grass, because when a trauma of some sort occurs, cringing, it's physiological. There's no control over it. And so when the shot was fired, her body cringed in cadaveric spasm. And there's no faking that. That told us this is a primary crime scene, not a dump job.
Unfortunately, other than the bullets collected from her head and the 9mm casings, there wasn't a lot of other physical evidence found at the scene.
There's no identification on her, so detectives take a physical description, but we in Grand Prairie did not have a missing person that matched this physical description. So we sent a teletype to the other area police agencies, giving them the description of the body that had been found in our city limits. We got a call from the Mansfield Police Department. They had a missing person report for this 16-year-old whose mother had reported her missing that morning. The description of the body that had been found in Grand Prairie matched the description of the missing person, Adrian Jones. The family was taken to the medical examiner's office and shown pictures, and they positively identified Adrian Jones as the victim whose murder occurred in our city limits in Grand Prairie.
I can't even imagine what that would be like to be asked to go down to a morgue or a hospital and identify your child. I don't even want to think about it.
One of our students passed away yesterday. We
We lost one of the family.
The bad news comes through a loudspeaker today as students arrive early at school. The principal tells them that 16-year-old Adrienne Jones was brutally murdered.
I met Adrienne through Linda, her mom. Adrienne at the time was a teenager. She actually babysat for my kids. And as soon as I found out, I went over to the Joneses' house, and I see Linda, her husband Bill is there. You know, she grabs me, and we're just holding and hugging and crying, and I can't imagine losing a child to such violence. This girl, who I know had hopes and dreams, is just gone. Mansfield is a small town. All-American, you know your neighbors. I don't think anything like this had ever happened in this area at all.
Mansfield's a very close-knit Texas football town, really dedicated to its sports and school and church, and this struck to the heart of everything that people were fearful about their own kids.
It was just so hard to believe. Who would want to do this to her?
Adrienne was a bright, well-liked, popular 16-year-old sophomore at Mansfield High School. Pretty, active in school. She runs on the cross-country team. Widely liked throughout the school. She makes a great first impression on everybody she meets.
Adrienne was a free spirit. She loves life. She loves her family. They seem to look out for each other. Even though Adrienne's older, the only girl, I think the brothers Scott and Justin look out for her. I don't know of anybody that did not like Adrienne. She's just very friendly. She's very easy to talk to.
She was definitely an innocent victim of a horrible crime for a reason to be determined. There's an oath that we take as a homicide investigator to let nothing deter us from finding the truth about who took the life of the loved one on behalf of the surviving members of that loved one's family. And as a detective, the 25 homicides that I was involved in, I solved every one of them. So the street cops gave me the name, Mr. Homicide, and I was determined to solve this one as well.
Linda told me that the night before, it was a pretty typical evening, but she did say that before she went to bed, Adrienne was still awake and she was on the phone with somebody.
Her mother asked her who she was talking to, and she said she was talking to David from the track team. And her brother told us that around 2 o'clock, he heard her slip out of her bedroom window. Apparently, she routinely would go out in the middle of the night and talk to her friends.
Her brother, Justin, does remember hearing a car outside and a car door and maybe seeing Adrienne getting into the car, and then he falls back asleep.
And that began, for us, the development of the person of interest, David Graham.
Adrienne knows David through cross country. They run together, but also when they had to go out of town, they'd ride the bus together. So they were just acquaintances as far as anybody knew.
David Graham is a senior at Mansfield High School. He's an excellent student. He's actively involved in the ROTC. Everyone thinks of him as a real straight arrow.
When the investigators interviewed David Graham, he told them that on the night she disappeared, that he was studying with his girlfriend. The detectives asked David if he called Adrienne late at night. He said he did not, and his girlfriend confirmed David's alibi.
In 1995, all phone calls were hardline to hardline, so there aren't going to be any telephone records that give you times and calls made. Because David Graham had an alibi, there was nothing else connecting him to the case, the investigation moved on to focus on other people.
The autopsy was performed by Dr. Mark Krause of the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office. In his autopsy report, there's no evidence of sexual assault. And the ballistics check on the shell casings and the bullets found at the crime scene identified a Russian Makarov 9mm as the weapon that caused the bullet wounds. Dr. Krause believed a claw hammer caused the blunt force trauma to the back of Adrienne's head. Basically, a month and a half after Adrian's murder, the investigators had talked to every person of interest that had been brought to their attention during their criminal investigation. There was no other person or persons for them to pursue or continue investigating. Well, in February, the case goes cold.
Sometimes luck is what happens to break a case. And 8 months later, that lucky break comes from over 1,000 miles away.
The media coverage is as intense as I've ever seen. We had a made-for-TV movie and a book to contend with.
I fully believe that sometimes luck is what happens to break a case. We don't like to admit that, but it's true. And 8 months later, that lucky break comes from over 1,000 miles away.
In late August of 1996, the Naval Academy reached out to the Mansfield police. They had female cadets that were having a conversation in their dormitory about how much their boyfriends loved them and would do for them. And during that discussion, there was a cadet named Diane Zamora who says, "My boyfriend loved me so much, he killed for me." And she told them he killed a girl named Adrian in Grand Prairie, Texas. Basically fessed up to these girls, trying to impress them with how much her boyfriend loved her more than their boyfriends loved them. And so those cadets took that information to the legal department at the Naval Academy. And they reached out to the Mansfield police because that's where Adrian went to school. Diane Zamora was 18 years old, and she was the alibi David Graham used when he was asked about having the phone call with Adrian. I was with Diane studying for our test. She had been talked to by the detectives, and she'd confirmed David's alibi.
David Graham and Diane Zamora were known in their respective communities to be the all-American kids.
Diane and David met in high school. Diane went to Forest Hill High School. David went to Mansfield High School. They got to talking to each other, and they fell in love. It had gotten very serious very quick. Diane felt like this was her one-time love of her life, the person you're going to give your virginity to. But that's the way Diane was raised. After high school, David Graham is at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And Diane is at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And they had plans to have careers in the Air Force and the Navy, and then to wed and be a couple for life.
David Graham and Diane Zamora's relationship wasn't just teenage love or puppy love. They were madly, obsessively in love with each other. Writing letters all the time, constantly communicating. They referred to themselves as Diane, who was the kitten, and David, who was the tiger.
The intensity and the emotion was white hot. David is as obsessed, in love, dependent, needful of Diane as any young man ever was of any young woman. I've never seen anything like it, frankly.
The naval authorities reached out to the Mansfield police, who reached out to the Grand Prairie police, and detectives went out to Annapolis and interviewed Diane. And Diane basically said, "Oh, I just made all that up. I knew about the story about that girl from the high school being killed because I wanted to impress the other girls." And the Navy made the decision to send her home on a leave of absence, pending their investigation and the criminal investigation. After the Naval Academy sent her back to Texas, she lands in Dallas and promptly takes a plane to Colorado. She went to the Air Force Academy and visited with David, and they discussed what she had said and the ramifications, and then she came back and went to her grandmother's house in Forest Hill, Texas.
You always want to ideally keep co-defendants or co-conspirators from talking to each other once you've identified them, because you don't want them to be able to get their story together. It messes up your investigation.
On September the 4th, detectives went to Colorado Springs to interview David at the Air Force Academy. He basically started out with the same denial that Diane had made all that up, and it was a dumb mistake on her part. But then the Air Force, he's an Air Force cadet, they have a little power over him, ordered him to take a polygraph, which he fails. The Air Force authorities tell him, you need to tell the police the truth about what happened.
Look who David Graham is. He's not some kid in public school who wants to smoke weed and detail his van. He's the Air Force Academy, the essence of regimentation. Sir, yes, sir. Sir, no, sir. David is going to do what the authority figures are basically telling him to do.
David, after being advised of his rights against self-incrimination, sat down and typed a 4-page statement giving all the details about how he and Diane killed Adrian Jones and why.
In his confession, David talks about on November 4th, a month before the murder, David and Adrian are at a track meet together. They're on the same team.
I was giving a friend a ride home late one night after returning from a cross-country meet in Lubbock, Texas. Adrian surprised me by asking me to take some turns that I knew were out of the way. After being directed onto a dark path behind an old elementary school, I parked the car. The events that followed are not pleasing for me to relate, as they go completely against the moral background I have grown to appreciate.
David tells Diane about Adrian and the fact that he has had a sexual relationship with her. And at that point, Diane just becomes out of control with jealousy and a need to make it right.
The only way he could make it right was to kill her.
The request of Adrian's life was, not for a second, taken lightly by me. I couldn't even believe she would ask that of me.
The person who had taken from her the one thing she wanted the most from him, his virginity. He was on the phone with Adrian, and he was telling her he needed to talk to her about something, and she agreed to come out of her bedroom through the window and get in the car with him to go out as a friend. And David promptly takes Adrian out to Joe Pool Lake in Grand Prairie. They had a set of weights in the back floorboard behind the passenger seat. Diane was in the trunk. Diane pushes the back seat down and crawls into the inside of the car. David begins trying to break Adrian's neck. Diane's in the back seat. She takes one of the weights and smashes Adrian in the back of the head.
Adrian somehow crawled through the window and, to our horror, ran off. I was panicky and just grabbed the Makarov 9mm to follow. To our relief, at the time, she was too injured from the head wounds to go far.
He got out of the car, walked over to where her body was. Diane told him, finish it. Stood over her and fired these 2 shots into her head. Then they got back in the car, and Diane said, we shouldn't have done that. And David said, nice time to tell me that.
When Diane told David that they shouldn't have done that and killed Adrian, David says, now you tell me. That just reemphasizes to me that this was always a stupid plan that never needed to happen. And Adrian Jones paid the ultimate price.
The detectives faxed that statement to the Grand Prairie Police Department, and the Air Force Academy held him in custody until extradition came and extradited David to Tarrant County. And the sergeant calls me and one of the other detectives initially involved in the case into his office. And he tells us we were going to get a warrant for Diane Zamora's arrest for capital murder. After she was booked, I took her into an interview room and I said, I have a statement that David made. I gave her one example from each page, some specific thing that he said happened. And I showed her his signature on the bottom of each page. So I said, would you like to go upstairs and give me a statement? She said, yes, I would. In her statement, she talked about the virginity aspect and how that had torn her heart. I mean, she just had this mentality. Our virginity was supposed to be shared between each other.
I don't think I was thinking. In fact, I know I wasn't thinking. I screamed at him, "Kill her, kill her." All David wanted to do was make everything better. David promised to do that, and David has never broken a promise to me.
And he had so violated her lifelong thoughts about love and marriage that she decided that the only way he could make it right was to kill Adrian Jones. She talked about how she went and got in the trunk and it was her mother's car, and the events around the actual attack were similar to David's statement.
He shot her twice in the head. He ran back and jumped into the car and drove off as quick as he could. I remember the first words out of his mouth were, "I love you, baby. Do you believe me now?"
The investigators were able to obtain a search warrant for David Graham's father's house. And in the attic of that house, they were able to recover a 9mm Makarov pistol and some weights that had blood on them. Blood that was a positive match to Adrian Jones.
We also found Diane Zamora's mother's car, and inside the door panel of the passenger side was Adrian Jones' blood.
Nearly a year after a Mansfield teenager was found shot to death near Joe Pool Lake in Grand Prairie, police say 2 military students have confessed to Adrian Jones's murder.
There's nothing more devastating than the loss of a child, no matter how it happens.
This didn't just shake people in Mansfield. What made this a national story was that this was a Navy and Air Force cadet.
The media coverage in this case is as intense as I've ever seen.
Before anything can be brought to trial, you already have a made-for-TV movie out.
She must suffer the consequences.
Whatever you said.
You have a book written about this case that probably have a whole lot of inaccuracies. It could potentially make your case harder to prosecute. David Graham and Diane Zamora were both being held in custody, but on separate floors at the Tarrant County Jail. Although they both basically confessed and admitted their involvement to law enforcement for what happened to Adrian Jones, you wouldn't know that by the way they were interacting with each other in the Tarrant County Jail.
After they've been arrested and they're in jail awaiting trial, they start writing each other letters. They send each other letters with doodles in the margins and heart shapes, and they're still living in this teenage emotional bubble.
It was a hard summer for the both of us, and I can't help but cry because it was all in vain.
About the trials, what we talk about should stay out of letters for obvious reasons.
The academy was your dream, and I crushed it, and I want to just kill myself over it.
I don't know if this will make you feel better or worse, but I'm told my case will be easier to defend than yours.
Maybe I'll just die in my sleep, and you can pin everything on me and go free.
On top of the national sensation this case already presented, Judge Joe Drago, in one of the first times ever, let court TV cameras in to film the whole trial. Back then, all the old school judges didn't believe in cameras in the courtroom. And I remember thinking the first time they filmed one of my trials, how many little things people could learn and see for real as far as how things really work in the courtroom.
Linda Jones, Adrian's mother, tried to be very honest and open, reminded everyone to always remember Adrian and always put Adrian first.
She's with us every day for the rest of our life in joy and happiness. And we're going to remember that joy and happiness always as a family.
But it wasn't the massive media attention that was the biggest issue in this case. When you have this romantic relationship, male-female, you have to worry that is somebody going to feel sorry for her that the boy was a brute and talked her into doing it? Or is somebody going to maybe feel sorry for him that this conniving, cunning woman talked him into doing it? And you always have to worry about that happening because it only takes one juror to buy into that story for it to be a problem with your case.
Diane's trial begins February 2nd, 1998. She's the first one to go to trial, and she's facing a charge of capital murder.
Because in Texas, capital murder is murder committed during the commission of what we say happened to be one of the enumerated or underlying felonies. In this case, aggravated kidnapping.
They unlawfully encouraged her to come out of her house. So that was basically a kidnapping. And kidnapping in the course of murder is called capital murder.
All right. From the beginning, Diane presents a very put-together image. She's always just meticulously dressed and fairly stoic, unemotional in the courtroom all day in front of the jury.
Even if Diane Zamora's defense strategy would be, I didn't really mean for this to happen. David Graham is the big, strong guy with the temper. He's the one that pulled the trigger. If she's in the car, what is she doing in the car? Is she still telling him to do it? Is she running away? Is she saying stop? Those are all the little pieces of the evidence that the prosecution has to make sure they make clear to the jury.
At the conclusion, the picture will be graphically clear, and each one of you will feel compelled by the law and by the evidence to return a verdict of guilty to capital murder against Diane Michelle Zamora.
I knew Michelle Hartman because she was my secretary when I was in County Court 7. She didn't even tell us back then she was thinking about going to law school. But to sit second chair with Mike Parrish on this big a case was a huge next big step for her.
Diane's defense team focused on pushing all of the blame on David. Their goal is to present David as this domineering person in every aspect of Diane's life. To her attorneys, David did everything and pretty much made her come along.
You people will know what happened on that night, and you will have reasonable doubt.
One of the things that the defense in Diane Zamora's trial was really fighting against was having the judge allow into evidence Diane Zamora's written statement.
In my testimony in Diane Zamora's trial, the defense attorney tried to accuse me of doing all kinds of improper things, tried to prove that I, some way or another, read every word of David Graham's statement to Diane Zamora. No, I did not.
Did you coerce her in any way to give that statement?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you make her any promises that would induce her to give that statement?
No, sir, I did not.
When you know that the answers that come out of your mouth are truthful, there's no anxiety. And the judge ruled that her statement was admissible as evidence.
The best way for the prosecution to clearly show her involvement in the planning and execution of the murder, the strategy would be to bring in as many witnesses as you could possibly find who can talk about what Diane said to them to show Diane Zamora's state of mind and the planning that went into this. The prosecution's first witness was a high school friend of Diane Zamora's, a girl named Christina Mason.
She said, this is a girl they had sex with. They had planned her murder.
You couldn't have found better witnesses that lived in the world of David Graham and Diane Zamora.
Well, at first she said that she had totally cleared her conscience and that the girl deserved it. Everyone knew that the girl was a tramp and a slut and that she deserved to die.
Diane said Adrian deserved to die because she had taken something of hers that she knew belonged to someone else.
On top of this witness testimony, the prosecutors were able to bring into the courtroom the murder weapons, the 9mm Makarov, the barbell weights with Adrian Jones' blood on them. And then after the prosecution rested their case, the defense made what I thought was a bold and shocking move by calling their client Diane Zamora to the stand.
When Diane takes the stand, it's really the dramatic Perry Mason moment that people expect.
If you're really guilty, you don't take the stand. That's the way trials usually work, because they don't want you to break down. They don't want you to crumble.
The burden of proof in all criminal cases is on the state. It's on the prosecutors to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. For that reason, most defense lawyers understand that, and they don't have to put on any evidence. A lot of cases end with the defense just saying, the defense rests. I think to put a defendant on the stand in a murder case is a huge risk.
She's taken through a very controlled examination by her lawyer.
Were you obsessed with David Graham?
Yes, sir.
Were you also afraid of David Graham?
Yes, sir.
Did you also love David Graham?
Yes, sir.
The best way for the defense to take advantage of Diane Zamora testifying is to have her, as much as she can, play the victim. That she was manipulated by David Graham, that none of this was her idea, and that he overpowered her and controlled her, and that wasn't the case, but they did try to play it that way.
Did you hit her with a weight?
No, sir.
Did you hit her with any kind of blunt object whatsoever?
No, sir. It looked like she'd run into something. I figured it was a fence.
It gets pretty emotional. There are several times when she does cry on the stand.
When the crook of his arm came down, I heard a gunshot go off immediately.
You heard a gunshot?
He told me she was dead.
And did you believe him?
No.
Did you believe that David had killed her?
No.
The emotions seem pretty sincere.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure that anyone thought she was making it up.
Tell the jury what he said, please.
He said, look what you made me do.
The defense ends up with some evidence pointing to their relationship and the role David may have played. There's some letters suggesting that he has some control over Diane.
He'd try shoving it between my legs, and he put it in my mouth. He was trying to pretend he was raping me. I told him to please stop.
The defense paint a picture of David as an abusive boyfriend.
Most defense lawyers don't get the beauty of having a defendant like a Diane Zamora that looks so perfect. Maybe they relied on that a little too much and put Diane Zamora on the stand. This gives the prosecution a chance to cross-examine Diane Zamora and unravel whatever carefully practiced and orchestrated story she had planned to give that jury.
She's asked difficult and pointed questions by the prosecutors.
Did you tell Jennifer McKinney that Adrian Jones was a slut?
No, sir. I believe she misinterpreted a lot of what I said, but she's not a liar. Christina Mason is a liar, though.
She kind of becomes a little more negative. You could sense that perhaps she's getting angry.
I want you to find the portion in David Graham's statement when you have Adrian in the car where David Graham says you told him to kill Adrian. Out there at the car at the murder scene.
I told you his statement is very general, so it wasn't in there. But I also said my statement was not true.
Did you tell Jay Guild that you would kill Adrian Jones again if you could?
No, because I didn't kill her.
You can practice and prep a defendant all day long, but when they get up there under the pressure, if a prosecutor goes at them the right way, they're always going to break some, and I think that you can't hide what you are. The prosecution did a wonderful job of cross-examining her, breaking apart her story, making her look a whole lot more cold and mean than I bet the defense ever wanted her to look like.
Justice matters. Truth matters. Adrian matters.
Diane Zamora, on December 4th of 1995, was judge, she was jury, and she was the executioner.
After closing arguments, the jury was sent back to begin deliberating. They deliberated all afternoon, and just when people were starting to wonder if it was going to be a protracted deliberation, they come back and return a unanimous verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant Diane Michelle Zamora guilty of the offense of capital murder as alleged in the indictment.
The district attorney was going to seek the death penalty in Diane Zamora's trial. Linda Jones went to the district attorney and said, I don't want parents to have to deal with what I've dealt with. I don't want the death penalty to be asked for.
It's difficult to lose a child, but to see other children die is pointless.
What the Jones family did was an act of true grace.
Basically, when she was found guilty, it was just capital life, which was 40 years from the day you were arrested.
With the conviction of Diane Zamora, the prosecutors don't really get to rest on their laurels because they know that they have coming down the road 5 months from then the trial of David Graham. David Graham hired Dan Cogdell. Personally, I know him very well, and I can tell you he is one of the best lawyers I have ever seen in the courtroom, and I've referred people to him as the best lawyer that they could possibly ever want to hire.
I had just defended Clive Doyle in the Branch Davidian case, and David's mother, I think, read about that result and called me to assist her son in his charges.
I can tell you that Michelle and Mike better be ready for Dan Cogdell because he's going to think of things to throw at them that they did not have to deal with in their first trial.
You don't have to be around those two kids for more than about 60 seconds to figure out who's the controlling alpha in that relationship. There's no question Diane Zamora is more responsible. This murder would have never happened but for Diane Zamora. Period, full stop. Diane's trial affected David's trial in a couple of different ways. First, it increased the attention and the publicity that David's trial already had, which he needed like a hole in the head. Second, by the fact that she was found guilty, it's in the public's forefront that if one defendant is guilty, another defendant is guilty.
The benefit that David Graham's lawyers have, Dan Cogdell and his team, is that they now have a playbook that they can look at to see what the prosecutors are going to do, the order they put on witnesses, the specific questions they ask of all the witnesses, like a cheat sheet that they can use to see what's coming at them when they get ready to go to trial.
You lied to your mother about what you knew, right?
Yes.
You lied to your principal about what you knew.
Yes.
You lied to the police about what you knew.
Yes.
Dan Cogdell does what he does best. He starts poking holes at the witnesses' stories.
Did Diane Zamora ever suggest to you that she was hiding in the trunk and came out and surprised Adrian Jones or anything along those lines?
No, sir.
He starts picking on the way the crime scene was processed, all the things that you would fully expect him to do.
It was important to put it in as sterile of a container as possible.
Yes, sir.
And instead of doing that, y'all put it in a cigarette container.
Yes, sir.
And then Dan Cogdell brings in a brand new witness who throws a landmine in the state's theory of the case. After Diane Zamora's guilty verdict and as David Graham's trial began, the one thing that up until then everybody thought they understood was the motive for why this murder happened. That is, until this new witness came forward, turning the whole case upside down.
The belief was all along that David had indeed had a sexual relationship with Adrian Jones coming home from the track meet in Lubbock. And so it was out in the news about what the motive was. After Diane Zamora's trial, a friend of theirs named Wendy came forward.
You drove Adrian Jones home from the Mansfield High School parking lot following the Lubbock track meet.
Yes, sir.
David Graham could not and did not drive her home that night.
No.
In Diane's trial, the state's theory was that David had to participate in the murder of Adrian Jones because David had told Diane that he had had a sexual relationship with Adrian. Wendy's testimony showed that David never had a physical relationship with Adrian. Therefore, the state's theory that that was the reason that he agreed with Diane to kill Adrian, I think it should cause a reasonable doubt with the jury.
But I think this strategy really hamstrung the defense that David would lie about whether he was intimate with Adrian. Merely gives the prosecutors the opportunity to say if he'll lie about this thing, he's lying about everything.
So what do you have in this case? David Graham's written admissions corroborated by physical evidence found in his father's attic, including the murder weapon itself. You have weights that have Adrian Jones' blood on them. You have corroboration from everything Diane Zamora said. So whether or not he made up this story to Diane about his involvement with Adrian Jones, it makes the murder more stupid, but it doesn't lessen his culpability at all.
You know that she was the sacrifice on the altar of David Graham's ego, his cowardice, and his utter lack of humanity.
On July the 24th, after 10 hours of deliberations, the jury convicts 20-year-old David Graham of capital murder.
When it was all over, I felt badly for Linda. By this time, she was exhausted. I think we all felt bad for these families and for these kids and the lost future.
I remember her eyes with joy. You will with fear.
I have no hate for you. I can't hate an animal, for they are ignorant, dumb, and blind. It ruined so many lives, so many families. And unlike my brother, I can hate an animal, and I hate David Graham.
He's your prisoner, Sheriff.
David Graham and Diane Zamora are both still sitting in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Since they were 20 when they were convicted, when they are 60 years old is when they will first be eligible for parole.
"104 homicides I worked and or supervised in 18 years, 1 month, and 15 days in major crimes. The murder of Adrian Jessica Jones is the most gruesome and unnecessary, unforgivable crime that I had anything to deal with in my career. You put me in front of a parole board, a man that can maintain his composure is probably not going to maintain his composure in that moment. Because this young lady who would be 43 years old now is not here, doesn't have any children, doesn't have a husband. I apologize.
The thing that makes me the craziest about this case, it was just so senseless. 3 teenagers who had their whole lives in front of them, and look what happened. 2 are rotting in prison cells for the rest of their lives, most likely, over nothing, over an obsessive love that went crazy wrong. And Adrian Jones is lost forever, and her family is still having to deal with that.